What does it actually mean to say that Christ is King? Is it just a harmless profession of religious faith, or is it an insult directed to a particular ethnic or cultural group? Either way, this video is being released on the feast of Christ the King on the traditional Catholic liturgical calendar, and its purpose is to recognize that legitimate religious feast as it was instituted in 1925 by Pope Pius XI. But aside from that, I'll take the time to answer that question that I opened with, and solely for the legitimacy and importance of this religious feast, and not to engage in any of the vitriol or polemics which occurred last spring between all of the commentators on this issue. The commentators who so callously dragged this feast through the mud, making all kinds of accusations, especially that of anti-Semitism. We'll get into that next, but first, as always, we start with our mission.
Always remember, God created us for this time and for this place. If we learn this faith, if we live this faith, if we share this faith, what will the next 100 years look like? Join the mission.
Well, I've been gone for quite some time. I needed to take some time off to deal with some other aspects of this ministry, and unfortunately, life happens, and I ended up being gone much longer than I expected. But we're once again producing videos, so keep an eye out for lots of new content, and please help us grow by sharing our videos. And now to the topic at hand. Not too long ago, a controversy erupted over the statement that Christ is King. And after the dust has settled and everyone has had a chance to weigh in on the topic, it seems to me that one very important point was not addressed, which is what I hope to do next. In 1925, Pope Pius XI established the Feast of Christ the King. But recently, this belief has undergone some intense scrutiny, with many critics even claiming that it's somehow anti-Semitic. When Pope Pius established this feast in 1925, he wasn't creating something new, a new Christian doctrine. The idea that Christ is King is as old as Christianity itself. So why then did the Pope proclaim this feast in 1925? What is often missed and misunderstood is that the events of the 19th century, along with the Industrial Revolution and most especially World War I, had in fact changed the face of the world, especially in Europe, in that the established political order was completely transformed. The old order of kings and kingdoms was gone, replaced by the nations and nation-states which we are more familiar with today. But it is important to remember that many of these nations were founded around some questionable ideologies and were inclined to establish laws which contradicted traditional Christian morality and jurisprudence. Totalitarian governments and communist governments were all too happy to create the illusion that all goodness, all truth, and all happiness came directly from them and their big government programs, and not from God. And even the democratic governments of the West, which were based upon the will of the governed through elections, they were even inclined to devolve into mob rule if those populations used their votes to contradict Christian virtue and moral order. And so it was necessary for Pope Pius XI to reassert that Christ is King, that social order, all objective reality extends from him. By establishing this annual feast, he was reminding the world of a truth that now, in modern times, was less obvious than it had been in prior Christian generations. To elaborate, it is a common belief among conservatively minded individuals that rights come from God. But perhaps some conservatives inadvertently stop there. The fact is, it is not just rights that come from God, but actually everything. Everything comes from God. If we stop short only proclaiming that rights come from God, we might inadvertently imply that God hands us this package of rights and then sets us free to exercise them in any way that we choose. We may argue, I have the right to do this, or I have the right to do that, without considering that such a claim of rights may, in effect, disconnect me from God's providence for my life. In other words, God is set aside in the background, like the deists' clockmaker God. By saying that Christ is King, we assert that the entire created order comes from God and is returning to God. what we mean by God's providence. And this providence has a purpose, which is the good, the true, and the beautiful. Even if God's creatures twist and wind that path in such a way that evil occurs, God's plan is not thwarted. It still reaches its goal. Therefore, the idea that Christ is king should not simply be reduced to one aspect or one doctrine of the Christian religion, but is in fact an acknowledgement that history is following the overall plan of God, that we have come from him and we are returning to him. And therefore, everything that we do, all of our moral acts, have a purpose. What I'm describing at one time may have been obvious to everyone, because the political order of kings and kingdoms was originally intended to reflect this reality. But with the collapse of this order and the rise of nation-states, perhaps most people had lost sight of this fundamental truth. The rise of extreme ideologies such as socialism and nationalism and extreme industrialization was overwhelming the social conscience to such a degree that individuals may have had the impression that they were living to serve the state and were not part of God's providence. Pope Pius declared this feast day to remind people that if Christ is king, then all goodness and order comes from him for the purpose of my good end, for society's good end, and not for the purpose of enriching the big state. That truth is an objective statement of reality and not simply a reflection of my own perception or of my own preferences. And therefore, all governments, regardless of what kind of government they are, they derive their authority from God for the purpose of every man's good and to defend what is objectively true. In other words, the law that I should not kill an innocent human being or that I should not steal from my neighbor actually is part of the hierarchical order of reality founded in the mind of God. It's not simply an expression of my own preferences. A government has the authority to establish this law, a prohibition against killing an innocent person, based on those grounds. Now, this was lost on most modern nation states, which did outlaw killing, but not because it was a violation of the natural order, but simply because they, the individuals in authority, declared it to be illegal. And if they can declare it to be illegal, they can also declare it to be legal, which is precisely what we've seen many governments do in cases of eugenics, abortion, and euthanasia. This is what is wrong with the concept of social contract theory, the idea that what is wrong is what we declare is wrong, and so long as we all agree to it as some kind of social contract, then killing is wrong. But the idea that Pope Pius was trying to renew with the institution of this feast is that there actually is a natural order that extends from the Creator and should affect who we are and how we behave, both as individuals and as societies. A legal order that extends from the natural order by necessity, that laws are not just artificially proclaimed. This is what is encapsulated in the axiom that Christ is king, in opposition to the idea that I have these rights, so I am in effect king, or the totalitarian government provides me with bread, so they are in effect king. You see, the new social and political orders of the 19th century allowed for these kinds of ideas to subtly creep into our thinking. And therefore, by definition, the proclamation that Christ is king cannot in any way be anti-Semitic, for the simple reason that it would contradict the natural order, which in turn is based on God's divine law. And anti-Semitism, racism of any kind, is a violation of natural law. The phrase cannot be anti-Semitic because words mean things. Christ the King refers to the proper social order based on divine law, natural law, and objective reality. It refers to a social order that, believe it or not, benefits everyone in society regardless of religion. It does not become anti-Semitic when someone uses it incorrectly, as some have tried to claim. The meaning of the phrase does not change when someone uses those words incorrectly, any more than words like marriage, baby, or woman change. Some commentators tried to assert that the phrase was anti-Semitic because of the way it was used. But incorrect usage does not change the meaning of words. The person using the term incorrectly may in fact be anti-Semitic, or they may be attempting to communicate something anti-Semitic. But that's entirely a different issue. If you believe that someone misused the term, then it was up to you to correct her, not to impute anti-Semitism to the term. In times past, there were these things called dictionaries, which maintained an accurate historical record of the meanings of words. When words were used incorrectly, it was common to refer to dictionaries and make the claim, oh, I think you're using that term incorrectly or ambiguously. It seems quite odd that I'm explaining this because the commentators in question are supposed to be conservatives. And when one thinks of the abuse of language as a political strategy, it is not normally conservatives that one thinks of. Now, of course, I'm not denying the natural and organic development of language over time, over long periods of time. What I'm objecting to is words that change their meaning immediately, overnight, artificially, to manipulate traditions and advance subversive political agendas. The phrase Christ is King refers to the proper ordering of society, and this is a good thing, regardless of what religion you may be. To be clear, this social order is good for everyone, even non-Christians, because the long-standing tradition of the Christian order is the upholding of natural law and of the Ten Commandments, that laws are not just made up spontaneously to support someone's political agenda. They extend logically from nature and nature's God. Now, I know there may be criticisms of my argument by appealing to historical figures who were Christians yet did evil things. But even that does not refute my argument. The claim is not that Christians are perfect. That's exactly the opposite of what Christianity claims. Christianity teaches that we are all fallen and in need of Christ's mercy and forgiveness and his divine assistance. Therefore, in a Christian society, we would expect to see individuals failing. The argument is that Christian social order provides a standard by which the guilty can be held accountable to, and a standard that Christians should aspire to. This is obviously better than the system we see in place now, a system run by anarchists and revolutionaries who seem bent on burning all of society down merely for hatred of tradition and financial gain. It's no secret this society is truly struggling to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong, between what is good and what is evil, between what is true and what is false. And I hope it's not too late to ask this question, but how can we even tell the difference between right and wrong? And what if we disagree?